Hello. Hello. What's your name? Okay, so that was a little different, right? Today, I'm going to be talking about teaching aids, teaching aids, and props. Now, the key reason to use teaching aids and props is to try and make life a little bit more exciting for your students. It helps them to remember things, it helps them to conceptualize what's happening, and for those kinesthetic or tactile learners, it gives them something to touch, to feel, to play with, and something just happens in the brain that makes it a little bit easier for a lot of students to understand things when you're also integrating some type of tactile and visual information. So props such as this, just a little ship, gives students another way to access information and another way for you as the teacher or teacher aide to explain what's going on. Now, we've been through, if you've seen some of my other videos, some different types of props, games, things like that you can use. But I've just brought in a few others today so that you can get a bit of an idea for the types of things that you could do in a classroom. Now, whether you're an adult or teaching adults, or whether you're teaching primary school or high school, I would encourage you to use as many props as possible. When I did my graduate diploma in teaching, secondary education, many years ago, probably 17 years ago or something, I still remember the occasion when one of the lecturers brought in some props. So there's certainly something to say about how using physical objects, even though I didn't touch it or play with it or anything like that, there's still something to say about how it differentiates or changes up the way in which you remember things and separates that lesson out or that activity out from all the other activities. Now, I've brought in a little vase here. I've actually brought in two. Now, one of my favourite activities to do with students, including adults, is to make them describe certain objects. And this is in, say, an English or literacy class. So you may put these objects on the table and you could ask students to spend 10 minutes, 6 minutes, whatever it is, writing as much as they can about these particular objects. Another thing that you can do with something like this or a box is getting students to not just write about it, but at the start to think what could be inside it. And then that's something they could write about as well. Or you could generate that excitement, even in high school, by saying something like, I've got a little bit of a interesting object inside this vase. What I want you to do is to guess what the object is. You're not allowed to look inside it. And then I need you to write about it and so on. So there's a whole raft of different activities that you can do with these types of objects. I also just walked around my home for a bit and I found this shell sitting on a bookshelf. It's a little bit dirty and broken and whatnot, but try and think about how you could use these objects in a class, particularly with primary school students. So if you were doing some type of reading activity and you could pass an object around while students are reading a paragraph or a short story, or even if they were writing about something, and even in maths class, imagine if you were teaching some type of algebra and while you were teaching that particular subject, you were able to bring in some objects so that students could play with and fidget with, even in high school classes. Now, I've got one other little thing that I wanted to show you today, and it's one of, I guess, the new areas. It's not new, but it's something that I'm noticing and seeing in schools more and more, and that's bringing in this particular prop. Oops, she tried to run away. This is my dog Coffee. Coffee is a Legado, which is sort of a I think they're an Italian dog that doesn't lose any hair. They used to be used for sniffing truffles and things like that 2,000 years ago or whatever it is. Even bringing in animals, particularly when you're working with students with disabilities and disorders, can be a fantastic way of reducing anxiety, making schooling and the education process so much more interesting, and also giving you the ability to generate conversation, to build rapport, and to go through those types of communication type issues or steps in furthering their ability to be able to communicate between each other, with a furry friend, with their peers, and with you. So it can be an activity generating and conversation generating type process. One of the other videos I did earlier was on social stories. So that was teaching kids, particularly those with neurological disorders such as autism, how to behave in certain situations. And you can see how, in terms of anger management, for example, involving animals and things like that and different types of props in that conversation, you can understand very easily how you can draw those links and how it can make it much easier for that particular student to be able to understand and conceptualize that activity. Just as if you're watching this, if you've watched my other lectures, hopefully you will have found that introduction, while kind of stupid really and a little bit embarrassing, as well as using my dog and other bits of paraphernalia, I guess, a little bit more interesting than the rest of my videos. And that's because I used props, and the same applies when you're working with students in a classroom. So you could use costumes, you could wear a Viking helmet, for example, if you were studying history. There's a whole range of different things you could do. I'm not really the creative type in that sort of sense, but if you are, feel free to go to class wearing a costume of some description or whatever it is that you decide to do. Any way that you can make that lesson or activity more interesting is always going to be beneficial. That even applies if you're working as a teacher aide or teacher assistant. In fact, especially if you're working as a teacher aide or a teacher assistant, because the teacher might not have as much time to be running around organising these different things. They're concentrating on other areas. You can try and go through that differentiation process by bringing in props, and you do that by having that conversation with your teacher on a regular basis when you come up with those types of ideas. So you wouldn't just rock up to class with a stuffed animal, like this weird snake-looking thing. You would actually have that conversation with them and then make sure that it was okay to bring in that particular animal or that particular whatever it is. So that's just a little note on teaching aids and props, and I hope you learned something in that lesson, and now you can start bringing in different objects and making life a lot more interesting, a lot more memorable, making concept understanding a lot quicker, and generally having more fun in your classroom, whether you're teaching year ones, whether you're teaching adults, or anywhere in between. Thank you for watching.